Practical anatomy of the brain. The body is formed by many systems like the musculoskeletal, cardiovascular, gastrointestinal, and one of them is the nervous system. The nervous system is divided into central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system divided into brain and the spinal cord, while the peripheral nervous system divided into somatic and autonomic. Of course, we are going to discuss the anatomy of the brain. This is the outer surface of the brain. Simply, we can say this is the cerebrum, this is the cerebellum, and this is the brainstem. If you look to the surface of the brain, it is not smooth, it is irregular. Why? Because there are many folds in it. The elevation of this fold, we call it gyrus, but the depression here, we call it sulcus. Of course, many of the gyrus, we call them gyri. As you can see, gyri. And here is sulci. If it is deep, sometimes we call it a groove. Here, written fissure or deep groove. This is another picture of the lateral view of the brain. This is the biggest part of the brain. We call it cerebrum. These are the gyri or gyrus, one of them, and this is the sulcus. Here, this is a deep sulcus. We call it a groove, right? And this is the brainstem, and of course, this is the cerebellum. In the next slide, you can see the way how we are going to divide the brain for discussion. This is, we call it sagittal plane. This is coronal plane, of course, horizontal and horizontal of the spinal cord. Here, the cortex of the brain, the outermost layer of gray matter, making up of superficial aspect of the cerebrum. Can you see this cutting? This is coronal section through the cerebrum, showing you this area. If you notice, at the outer part of the cerebrum, the matter is gray in color. We call it gray matter. It is formed by the nerve cells, a neuron. While here, it is white in color. Can you see it written here, white matter? What is white matter? It is only fibers. Can you see these fibers are going from one part of brain to another part over this area? We call it corpus callosum. This cerebrum, of course, divided into, this is, we call it hemisphere, and this is, we call it another hemisphere, divided by longitudinal fissure. Only connected here. What is here? It is the white matter. Another picture, this is superior view of the brain, and this is the lateral view of the brain. The brain, for functional description, and we divided it into 4 regions. This is in blue in color, we call it frontal lobe. This is the parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and the temporal. Of course, if you remember the anatomy of the skull, it is formed by many bones: frontal bone, parietal, temporal, occipital. So each part of the brain located on the bone of the same name. Here is the cerebellum and the brainstem. If we go more, this is the sulcus. Can you see it? It is dividing between the frontal lobe anteriorly and the parietal lobe. We call it central sulcus. Laterally, you can see there is a fissure. We call it lateral fissure. This divides the parietal lobe, frontal lobe superiorly, and the temporal lobe inferiorly. Of course, don't forget this one. The picture is here, sorry. This is transverse fissure between the cerebellum inferiorly and the cerebrum superiorly. This is longitudinal fissure. We discussed it already between the 2 hemispheres. Another picture, superiorly. The cerebrum is divided by longitudinal fissure. We discussed it already. This is a picture of cadaver. This is